Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is a revisit to an important subject from one of my very early videos regarding GA pilot conversion to ultralights. Back in 2018, after not making a video for the channel for 4 years, I happened to record some iPhone footage of my mate Keith training a GA pilot in the open cockpit Quicksilver Sport 2S, who had just bought the aircraft from me. The pilot had flown his GA aircraft up from Melbourne and stayed at Walls Air for several days while Keith conducted the conversion training. I realised I had enough footage to make a small story out of it. So that became my first video in 4 years, and in many ways, where the storytelling on this channel began. To my surprise, it went on to become one of the most watched videos on my channel. That tells me there are plenty of GA and ultralight pilots who consider this an important subject. So I thought it was time to revisit it. Not as a formal training video, but from my own experience after 20 years of flying ultralights. At the time, I asked Keith how many hours the conversion would take. His answer was simple. There was no magic number. He would sign the pilot off only when he was satisfied that he could fly the Sport 2S as an ultralight, rather than simply applying the habits and expectations of a GA aircraft. Part 1. Why this matters. In Australia, a GA pilot converting to recreational aviation must complete the required training and demonstrate competence in the appropriate group and type of aircraft. The amount of training depends on the pilot's previous experience and the applicable conversion pathway, but the real test is competency. Satisfying the instructor that you can fly the aircraft on its own terms, rather than simply treating it like a GA aircraft. The question is not whether an experienced GA pilot can fly an ultralight. Of course they can, but fly with the right training. The problem begins when someone thinks, I've got 3,000 hours in GA aircraft, so flying an ultralight should be easy. That assumption is where the danger can begin. Part 2. What does ultralight mean? The word ultralight covers an enormous range of aircraft. Some recreational aircraft are almost GA-like in weight, speed, and cockpit workload. Others are extremely light, simple and direct. The category alone does not tell the whole story. That became very clear during my recent biannual flight review with Keith in the Technam. The Technam sits in the RAI's recreational category, but it is a heavier and more complex metal aircraft. In many ways, it felt closer to a general aviation aircraft than to my Quicksilver GT500. For clarity, I do not have a GA license. I started flying ultralights over 20 years ago because I enjoyed their wonderful simplicity, and I had no future intention of moving on to GA aircraft. Part 3. Cockpit workload. The Technam and the Quicksilver both require the usual airframe and engine checks, followed by an engine run-up. But before we even left the ground in the Technam, there was much more to manage. Fuel pumps, instruments and gyros, fuel tank selection and fuel calculations, trim, flaps, and the general cockpit workload that you would expect in a GA aircraft. The takeoff and climb required more structured monitoring while navigating our way out to the circuit. The same applied on landing. Once established in cruise, however, I relaxed and simply flew it like the Quicksilver. That part felt quite familiar. In comparison, a Quicksilver takeoff is much simpler. Check the overhead fuel level, confirm that the rudder and ailerons are working correctly, set the flaps, make an outbound call, and apply full throttle. But that simplicity does not mean it requires less skill. It simply changes where the pilot's attention is directed. Part 4. How a light aircraft feels. A heavier aircraft generally carries more inertia. A light ultralight can slow down and lose energy very quickly. It also responds more immediately to changes in power, wind and turbulence. A gust or thermal that a heavier aircraft barely notices can move an ultralight around quite noticeably. That does not make the aircraft unsafe. In the case of my GD500, I know the airframe is stressed to +6 and -4 Gs. That gives me confidence in the airframe's operating limit, but I still have to respect the conditions and fly the aircraft properly. Many ultralights also reward proper rudder use. A pilot accustomed to a heavier or more stable aircraft may need to get their feet working properly again. The ultralight may be mechanically simple, but it can demand more feel and more direct involvement from the pilot. Part 5. Approach and landing. The greatest differences usually appear in the circuit, particularly during the approach, flare and landing. During my flight review, I found that the TechNam did not want to come down in the same way as the Quicksilver. Even after reducing power, it just wanted to float. So I had to manage the throttle carefully to establish the descent that I wanted. The GD500 reacts quite differently. In a lighter, draggier aircraft, reducing power requires you to lower the nose and monitor the airspeed closely to maintain the correct margin above the stall. At times, the descent angle in the GD500 can look remarkably steep compared with a GA approach, even while maintaining a safe airspeed. Its lightweight and high drag allows the descent to be arrested quickly as the aircraft transitions to the normal landing attitude. This is where the visual picture can fool you. The nose attitude, descent angle, flap use, and the view of the runway may all look unfamiliar to a pilot accustomed to a shallower GA approach. The important thing is not to chase the visual picture alone, but to manage the aircraft's energy, airspeed, attitude, power, descent rate, and flap setting, while remaining aware of the wind and the ground speed. Part 6. Respect, not fear. The message is not ultralights are dangerous. They are wonderfully simple and enjoyable aircraft, but they deserve to be flown on their own terms. For a GA pilot moving into ultralights, particularly one who continues flying both, the challenge is remaining aware of which aircraft they are flying and adjusting their expectations accordingly. In some ways, an ultralight is simpler. In other ways, it demands more feel, closer energy management, and a better appreciation of how quickly things can change. That is why conversion training is essential. It is not simply a box-ticking exercise. It teaches the pilot the sight picture, handling, and practical characteristics of that particular aircraft. Learn the aircraft, respect its differences, and fly it on its own terms. So fly happy and fly safe. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I will see you in the next video.